Welcome to Unmasking Dementia Lived Experiences, a podcast featuring families who have navigated the challenges of dementia. Through heartfelt stories, we will delve into trials, triumphs, and wisdom gained along the way. My name is Christiana. I'm a registered nurse, dementia advocate, children's author specializing in dementia education, memory care specialist, owner of reputable memory care facilities in Toronto, Canada, as well as the founder of a Roosevelt Grammar Wellness Hub, a charitable organization that caters to the needs of communities of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Please join me in welcoming a very interesting guest, Joanne Cheng-Tandoc. Joanne, it's such an honor to welcome you to Unmasking Dementia Lived Experiences.
The pleasure is mine. It's an honor to be here with you as well, Christiana.
Yes, it's great. We were introduced by a mutual friend and Esther, so I'm really honored to have you on this podcast. You have quite an impressive and multifaceted background. You are a psychologist by profession, and also you worked in the first dementia clinic in the Philippines. And you as well possess extensive experiences in dementia care here in Toronto and surrounding areas. Recently, you started your own company dedicated to promoting dementia prevention. Additionally, you bring a personal perspective as a long-distance caregiver for your grandmother with dementia. I wonder, how is that going? Must be tough.
Yeah, it was tough, but my grandmother is in a better place.
Oh, she has gone.
She passed 2 years ago, but yeah, it was tough. Like, especially it was my grandmother who took care of me mostly because that when I was young, my parents were both working. So it was my maternal grandmother, and I was very close to her. And yeah, so yeah, it was tough. It was tough, especially not seeing her because she lived in the Philippines all of her life, and I migrated to Canada like 10 years before she passed.
May she rest in peace. Like you said, she's
Thank
at
you.
rest now.
Thank you,
Yes,
Christy.
yes. So Joanne is a brain health and cognitive wellness specialist and an internationally trained dementia care professional with 2 decades of experience in clinical research and education settings. She holds a master's degree in human development psychology from the De La Salle University, Manila, Philippines, and a master's degree in applied neuroscience from King's College, London, United Kingdom. Before migrating to Canada, she served as a psychologist and helped establish one of the first memory clinics in the Philippines. She has been an educator for various local Alzheimer's Society chapters, community health agencies, and clinical research settings in Ontario, Canada. She continues to develop programs and coach individual families, healthcare professionals, and communities on various topics related to wellness, mental health, and dementia care. She recognizes the importance of a lifespan and holistic approach towards successful aging and believes that no one is ever too young or too old to start doing something about their health. As a granddaughter and a long-distance caregiver of her maternal grandmother who lived with dementia, she is passionate about dementia prevention and caregiver wellness and is relentless in raising community awareness and empowering individuals to actively take charge of their well-being. This is amazing because that is what I love to do too. The passion is palpable when, you just want to do what is right for people, right? You want to help as you know, dementia is really difficult and it's a tough journey. So when you have that extra support, it makes a difference.
Yes.
So I'm really happy at the work you're doing, and I hope that you continue to achieve great success.
Oh, thank you so much, Christy. And yeah, like I'm also very happy to be doing this podcast and meeting you like for the first time through video, because I also admire your work with Alexis Lodge. I may have mentioned this to you earlier before the recording started,
Yeah.
that before Esther introduced the two of us to do this podcast, I was like following your LinkedIn account. So and I guess like it's, even though it's our first time to meet, because of the shared passion, I think it's it's easy to talk. It's as if I feel like we've known each other for
Yeah,
quite
it
some
feels
time.
that way because we share a common passion and lived
Mm-hmm.
experiences with either through family or professionally. So
Mm-hmm.
I guess my first question to you then doesn't seem as relevant because but anyway, it's like the chicken or the egg, which came first? Did your grandmother have dementia before you got involved, or what was your inspiration in becoming a dementia uh, advocate, professional educator, and all the things
Mm-hmm.
you do in the field of dementia?
Yeah, I will answer that question. So the first question about did my grandmother get dementia before I went into the field, the answer is no.
Okay.
So my grandmother developed dementia when I was already here in Canada.
Oh,
Okay, so I was born and raised in the Philippines. I was educated in the Philippines. I got my all my education, my master's, my first master's degree was in the Philippines, and I got to practice psychology. I was a neuropsychologist then, but like it's funny because like I never thought that dementia would affect my life personally. And it's also funny because as a young girl, I dreamt of becoming a medical doctor, and I wanted to become a pediatrician, like a doctor that works with children.
right.
And so as I was doing my undergrad and my masters, like it's funny how I met teachers, like my teachers, I think admired my work, and they asked me if I would be interested in working with them or working for them to establish the first memory clinic in the Philippines. So it was not my idea. Like they just said like, "Hey Joanne, do you want to be part of our, the first memory clinic in the Philippines?" And that first memory clinic was in a public hospital, public teaching hospital, the University of the Philippines, Philippine General Hospital. And so they back then when they invited me to become one of their psychologists, back then in the Philippines, the field of psychology wasn't regulated, because here in Canada, the practice of psychology is regulated.
Right.
And like you have to become, to have a PhD, and you have to like do certain exams to be regulated. But 20 years ago, when they asked me to become one of their psychologists, like a master's degree was enough. Right. And so I at first like, hey, this is like the extreme end of my dreams. I wanted to work with young kids, and now why am I working with older adults
Right.
and with dementia? Like, but then like I said, well, why not try? And back then I was also teaching as a university professor, and I was also like working with kids, because my family has like several businesses, and one of our businesses was a school. Like we have like childcare, we have up to high school, and so and I even worked in HR. So I said like all these types of jobs didn't feel fulfilling to me, and
Mhm.
so I said I told my family I would want to work in the hospital. I would
Hmm.
want to try working with older adults. And lo and behold, when I worked there, one of the first clients that I met was a mother and daughter tandem. The mother was taking care, or sorry, the daughter was taking care of her 81-year-old mom. And aside from that, she had a lot of obligations, a lot of, and they were not well off. And like my heart just sank. And since then, I felt that, this, it gave me fulfillment. It was beyond words.
Mhm.
And I just knew then from then on that this is the field that I wanted to grow. This is the field where I wanted to help people. And yeah, since my work in the Philippines, and even when I migrated, even though I couldn't practice psychology here, but still I was blessed to have worked with different Alzheimer's Society chapters that still allowed me to help people, families who are affected by the disease. So that's my inspiration. I think it's more it's the calling that called me. It wasn't what I
The
really
mission.
wanted or
No.
envisioned to do.
Yes. Can you explain what dementia really is and how it differs from aging?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
let's try to like dissect the difference, because there seems to be a thin line between dementia and normal aging, and a lot of times people get confused when they hear the term dementia. Another term that they often confuse dementia is Alzheimer's disease. They
Yes.
think dementia and Alzheimer's disease are the same thing, but they're two different things as well. But to your question, let's distinguish dementia and normal aging. When we say dementia, it refers to a group of symptoms that accompanies a disease. So, for example, if a person is forgetting a lot, having difficulty with communication, difficulty with day-to-day tasks, like all those things, those are symptoms. So it's a group of symptoms. When we say dementia, it's usually associated or brought about by a particular disease. Okay, and Alzheimer's is the most common form or the most common cause of dementia. Okay, so that's dementia, to define the term dementia. Now, normal aging. Normal aging also comprises of symptoms, right? Like we also experience forgetting. We also experience, sometimes, the tip of the tongue phenomenon when you're like wanting to say something but couldn't say something, right? But these we say like, oh, that's just normal, right? Now, how do we distinguish if this is just normal, right, as part of the aging process? Because as we age, we lose some of the brain cells. So that's normal to lose brain cells as we age. It's just that in conditions like Alzheimer's disease, the death or the dying neurons die much at a faster rate. But in normal aging, we also lose brain cells. And that's also why sometimes, it's hard for us to pay attention or we forget. Now, as a normal lay person without using sophisticated brain scans, like how do we know if this is normal or if this is, if this is dementia, right? So what I usually tell to people is, first, we have to, of course, we don't diagnose ourselves, right? That's done by a doctor. But just to give us an idea if this is something that we should bring up to our doctor, for example. If, for example, so it begins with knowing ourselves or maybe knowing our family member, because we have to have a baseline, right? What is normal for me, Christy, might be different from what is normal for you, right? Or what is normal for another person. And so it's important to start with knowing what is normal with ourselves. And then the next thing that I always advise people is to look at how frequent is this symptom that you are noticing, right? Is it just, once in a while, or is it, every day, like so you have to look for the frequency. You also have to look at the type of symptom, because not all memory loss are due to Alzheimer's, or not all memory loss are due to dementia. Now, when I say type of symptom, so let's just highlight the symptom of memory loss or forgetting, right? It's common, for example, for us to forget where we parked our car when we go to the mall, right? Now, if we have forgotten where we parked our car, is that normal? Well, again, depending on the frequency, right? So if you always forget where you parked your car, wherever you go, places, right? And that's not how you are, or not how you were, right? So you consider that. But you also have to see, right? If, for example, you just forget where you parked your car rarely, every now and then, just happen once, right? That's okay. It happens to everyone. But if, for example, you forgot that you drove your car to the mall and you took a bus instead, right? So that's concerning, right? Because you totally forgot, short term, very recent event.
Right,
okay.
right.
So again, frequency, the type of forgetting or the type of symptoms, also the intensity. So if it's normal aging, it should be the same, right? When it started, and when it's not changing in intensity. Whereas if it's the start of a disease process due to some brain changes, then you might notice a progression, right? It's getting worse. And then also the duration. You have to observe if the symptom stays the same, or if the symptom has been happening for quite some time. Usually we advise patients to see if your symptoms are progressing or continuous for more than 2 weeks, or more than 3 months, or 6 months. And then if you feel that the duration is prolonged, along with the other things that I mentioned, the frequency, the intensity, the type, then it might necessitate for that person, or for the person's family member, to start asking for the family doctor to check if this is normal aging or the start of dementia.
So my next question to you is, what are ways that you can manage behaviors? Like for some, like you said, everyone exhibits different symptoms. I think there's research out there that says even up to 40% of people with dementia will have responsive behaviors. What would you say to families? This is the most difficult part of it, even in professional care settings, when people are becoming aggressive or physically violent. It's really tough. So what is your advice on how people can deal with this phase of dementia?
Okay, thank you. That's indeed very relevant, Christy. So thank you for bringing this question. And first, I like how you phrased it as manage behaviors, and you called it responsive behaviors, because oftentimes I've heard many people, even professionals, call behaviors as challenging behaviors or difficult behaviors. Okay. And I like the term responsive because it highlights the fact that behaviors have meaning, and that behaviors are a way for a person, especially if a person has dementia or has communication issues, they're starting to lose their verbal abilities. Their actions or their behaviors become their way of behaving. Okay, so I like the term that you used there. Also, I'd like to emphasize, whether it's families or professionals caring for someone with dementia, it's important to remember that we cannot stop behaviors from happening. We cannot eliminate behaviors or responsive behaviors, okay? Because they are a part of the disease process. If, for example, a person has Alzheimer's or a person has another type of dementia, let's say frontal temporal dementia or a vascular dementia where part of their language was affected, it will be part of the disease process. And so the difficulty in that we're seeing, right, that will be part of the disease process. And as I mentioned earlier, it's also a form of communication, right? So we cannot stop or eliminate the best we can do is to manage the behaviors, to minimize the behaviors, and to prevent them from escalating, right? So our goal is, if we see, for example, behaviors, if we see a person, for example, quote unquote, being violent, right? It's to like really describe what behavior is happening. What do we mean by violent? Is the person screaming, shouting, pulling your hair, pushing you, biting you? What does it really mean? Because we have to start from there. In order for us to address the behaviors or manage the behaviors, we have to specifically define what the behaviors are, right? So don't just label it as, violent, aggressive, okay? So that's number one. And also, I want to highlight that behaviors is part of being human. Aside from, it's a communication, it's part of the disease process. It's also part of being human. All of us have behaviors, like whether we admit it or not, sometimes we also become quote unquote aggressive, right? We also like scream at someone. We also shout at, or we also, cry incessantly, all those behaviors that we label as challenging or difficult or responsive behaviors to a person with dementia, that can also happen to a regular human being without dementia, right? Mm-hmm. So those are two things that I'd like to, emphasize before I, really give you some strategies. But if we are to look at strategies, if you remember our conversation from earlier around person-centered care, in order to address or manage the behaviors effectively when you are working or caring for someone with dementia, being person-centered, knowing the person, who they were and who they are right now, right? Considering also that their behaviors are a form of communication and that it's like they're communicating that they have a need that needs to be met, right? Putting all those together, then we can address, right? We can address the behavior. So let's give us more specific example just to make it concrete. Going back to the example earlier as to the person is quote unquote violent or aggressive. I started with saying that we have to define what the behaviors are. So we have to say, the person is throwing an item at the family member, okay, during personal care, right? So define what's the behavior and when it's happening. Then you have to look at what we call I'm sure you know this, there's a PIECES model, Christy. Yeah. PIECES is an acronym that stands for the factors that could influence behaviors. Right. So look at the person's physical aspect, look at their intellectual aspect, their emotional aspect, their capabilities, their environment, and their social history and social support. So physical, let's say this throwing things, right? Throwing things at the caregiver during personal care. maybe the person is cold, right? Physical, doesn't want to take a bath,
Yeah.
right? And add to that, maybe they have trouble expressing themselves. They have a condition that we call aphasia, for example. So that's an intellectual aspect. So maybe the throwing of items, is a form of communication saying that I don't want this, right? I don't want to take a bath, right? Then emotional, right? Maybe the person, again, as I said, they feel feeling cold. So maybe, they might associate that with feeling fearful, or maybe there's a new personal support worker that's coming in to help them, right? This maybe, like, even if it's at home, maybe someone's helping them and uh, uh, they're ashamed to undress in front of the personal support worker. And that's why they're throwing, items at this personal support worker. Then, so we look at physical, intellectual, emotional. We can also look at their C, or capabilities. Okay. So maybe the person is still able to do some things for themselves, right? And we assume that they can no longer give themselves a bath. Maybe they want to communicate that, hey, I can still like shampoo my hair, or, soap my body, right? And so maybe that's why they're throwing an item, right, at the caregiver. And then finally, the social history. So you also have to consider, what's the history of this person? Maybe he or she is a Holocaust survivor, right? Or maybe they're not used to a shower. Maybe they're used to a bath or a sponge bath, right? So you consider, and from there, by dissecting the pieces, the physical, intellectual, emotional, all these, then we can come up with strategies for each of the aspects. And that's how we can more effectively address or manage the behaviors or the mood changes that are, that may be associated with dementia. But don't always think, because we have the tendency, those of us who did not really like go through formal dementia education training, like lay people usually have an assumption that, there's nothing we can do because it's dementia, it's Alzheimer's, they're really like that. But what I encourage you is, again, go back to the person, look at every aspect of their life. If there's an unmet need that they are trying to communicate, then try to cover all your bases, and hopefully that will prevent behaviors from happening, or that will minimize or de-escalate behaviors from happening.
Yeah, like I often say to people, if your loved one gets the diagnosis of dementia, the best thing you can do for yourself and for that loved one is to learn everything that you can about the process. Because it's a very challenging and devastating journey. But the more you know, the better. Then you can anticipate certain things. Then you can know how to mitigate situations. It's very, very important, because if you don't know, you're going to have a very hard time, and you're going to make your loved one miserable. And so education, there are lots of resources, like the Alzheimer's societies, they offer a lot of education for families and so forth. Community agencies, just try to get out, reach out, get some support, even being in a support group. And again, listening to a podcast like this can give you also some pointers. So now, to address the big elephant in the room, we talk a lot about dementia, we talk about management and care for people with dementia. How do we prevent dementia or mitigate the risk factors of dementia?
Thank you. So I like that question, because I work, or that's my passion. It's more in quote unquote prevention. But when we say prevention, there's no 100% guarantee that when we do prevention that the person won't have dementia at all. Okay, we should remember that nothing in life is guaranteed, right? So I prefer the term risk reduction, and I'm glad that you used mitigate the
risk
the
factor.
risk factors. Okay, so there's a relatively recent, but it's not really recent, but this is the most recent publication that is in medical journals. It's peer reviewed, and it's a very popular medical journal called The Lancet. And in 2020, they published an article around dementia, quote unquote, prevention or risk reduction, where they identified 12 modifiable risk factors. Okay, so I can share with you what those risk factors are in a bit, but I just want our viewers or our listeners to know that dementia, again, there are many types of dementia, and although the most common is Alzheimer's and vascular, and many of these dementias also have what we call mixed pathologies. So they share, common changes in the brain. Okay, and they found that a lot of dementia cases are not genetic. They're not hereditary, meaning it's not, meaning you can do something. Most of the dementias, okay, because tendency especially for families is, oh, my grandmother had it, my mother had it, my father had it, so maybe I will have it, right? Of course, in every disease process, there's always what we call nature, meaning your genes, your biology, and nurture, meaning a person's environment. So you may be sharing some genes with your family members who had dementia, but you're also sharing environment with them. You're sharing maybe the food that you eat, right? The type of foods that you want to eat, or you might have picked up whether the lifestyle of whether you're sedentary or not, right? So the environment, the lifestyle also are shared by family members. And so in that journal article that I was referring to, they said there that about 40% of all dementias can be prevented by addressing, okay, one or all of the 12 modifiable risk factors. Okay. And so when I work with clients, I usually start with knowing, right, what their potential risk factors are. Right. And so in dementia, modifiable, when we say modifiable risk factors, these are things that can be changed, because again, the nature part, we cannot change. For example, age. That's a non-modifiable risk factor for dementia or for Alzheimer's specifically. So another non-modifiable risk factor aside from age is your genetics, right? And the gender or the sex that you were born with. Those are the things that cannot be changed. Okay, but there are things that the 12 modifiable risk factors that were identified in that Lancet journal article in 2020 are the following. So I'll read them to you, so that the viewers can also hear or learn more. You can take notes of the 12 modifiable risk factors as well. So let me just pull that up just to be sure I'm not missing anything. I'm going to pull up my notes as to what these 12 modifiable risk factors are. So they identified education. So specifically, a few years or less education. But again, it's not just the number of formal education, but also the education, the day-to-day education or the cognitive stimulation that a person has. Okay, so that's one. Hypertension is a modifiable risk factor. hearing loss, okay, that can also be a modifiable risk factors, because if you wear hearing aids, if you know or notice there are some changes with your hearing, then the use of the hearing aid can help lessen the cognitive or the load in your brain, right? So the hearing loss that would also promote socialization, because another potential risk factor for dementia is social isolation, which, if you have hearing loss, you tend to like isolate yourself from others. So that's the fourth modifiable risk factor. We also have depression. So if a person is depressed, they socially isolate themselves, right? They tend to be depressed. And there are other reasons for depression. So that can also be another modifiable risk factor. Then we also have to look at the cardiovascular risk factors. So hypertension is another modifiable risk factor. Smoking. Okay, so smoking is not just bad for your lungs, but also bad for your heart, bad for your brain, right? Obesity or being overweight, right? That's also another modifiable risk factor. Diabetes or having high blood sugar. Physical inactivity is also another modifiable risk factor. Then in that article, they also identified excessive alcohol consumption, and head injury and air pollution. So those are the 12 modifiable risk factors. Again, I know I put some explanation in between, but again, to reiterate, the 12 modifiable risk factors are less education, hearing loss, social isolation, depression, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, smoking, physical inactivity, excessive alcohol consumption, head injury, and pollution. And so if we are to dissect each of these risk factors, there is a behavior underlying them, right? And there is something that we can do around these modifiable risk factors. And so I know 12 is a big number to remember, but there are 5 behaviors or 5 things that we need to remember in terms of preventing or reducing our risk for dementia. It starts with, so if we are to look at what are the things in common among those 12 modifiable factors, what we can do is eat healthy, right? Because those cardiovascular risk factors, they have an underlying, factor with nutrition or with the food that we eat. So, what's a healthy diet? So they say a brain healthy diet is a diet that is rich in fruits and vegetables. And that's why they say the Mediterranean diet, okay? Or another type of diet that they found to help lower one's chances of developing dementia is the MIND diet. The MIND diet is a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH diet. The DASH diet is the diet for to stop hypertension. Okay, so that's the MIND diet. So Mediterranean or MIND diet is a type of diet. So it's not about the single nutrients that count when it comes to brain health. It's about your overall diet. To put it more simply, again, if you can't remember Mediterranean or you don't know what it is, of course, there's always Google nowadays. But just to simplify things, for you to know if the food that you have on your plate is healthy, think of it as a rainbow. The more colorful food you have on your plate, the better it is for your brain health. So if there are, berries, green leafy vegetables, all these are colorful, right? So that's, in terms of nutrition. In terms of activity, so the second behavior is be more physically active, right? Ideally, 150 minutes per week, right, is the ideal to minimize your risk. If you can do more, the better, right? And any type of exercise that you enjoy, right, that is that is really helpful in terms of brain health, because as you exercise, you pump oxygen, oxygen and nutrient rich blood to your brain, and it also minimizes all the risk factors. It improves your balance, right, preventing head injury. So exercise can do a lot of things. And then the third behavior is to unwind, right? It's important to manage your stress. Stress is inevitable, but how we respond, how we manage to stress, life stresses, is important. And under that, we also have to consider the next one is restorative sleep. So it's not about the quantity of sleep, although there's some data saying that if you sleep 7 or more hours, that's good for your brain. It's going to reduce your risk for dementia. While there's, that's good data, but not everyone can sleep 7 hours or more, especially as we age. The need for sleep is reduced, and the need for sleep varies from individual to individual. So what I always tell my clients and my learners when I educate is that look more at the quality rather than the quantity of sleep. So if you feel relaxed, restored upon waking up, and you sleep like, let's say, 5 straight hours, even if it's just 5 hours, if it's straight, it's uninterrupted, then that's sufficient sleep. So that's rest or restorative sleep. And the last behavior in terms of preventing behaviors is optimize, meaning engage in cognitively stimulating activities. Try to learn new things. Novelty is the one that would allow our brain cells to grow. Okay, there is a phenomenon that's called cognitive reserve, where it's believed that as we engage in new learning, okay, we always produce brain cells every day, new brain cells, even in adulthood. Okay, so that's neurogenesis. So we grow those new brain cells with cognitive stimulation, and of course with other things going on. But cognitive reserve means, if I were to use a layman's term, we put money in the bank. So it's cognitive reserve is you try to build your brain cells so that as we age, in the event that, let's say, due to normal aging, we lose our brain cells, we lose some brain cells, or in the event of a dementia, if you have built a lot of strong connections in your brain, then even if some of your brain cells die, right, then those healthy brain cells will compensate for the functions of the neurons that died, right? And so how do we build cognitive reserve? That is through engaging in new learning, right? Optimizing our learning, making sure that we learn something new, whether it is, not just from Netflix, not just from Google, but like, let's say we learn a new language, we travel, right? We communicate with others. We learn from each other, right? By joining your podcast, Christy, they learn new things. They can interact with each other, right? Those things are big, right? So again, just to summarize, I always like to summarize: in order to prevent or reduce your risk for dementia, engage in healthy behaviors, which includes healthy eating, physical activity, stress management, restorative sleep, and engaging in cognitively stimulating activities. So, yeah. So sorry for the long answer.
Oh, no, that is awesome, because I'm just thinking that should be a topic. I think I'll invite you back to just come and talk about prevention or mitigation of risk factors of dementia. It is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
not just dementia, but chronic diseases, that we
Yes,
have healthy lifestyles. Like,
exactly.
I think one of my favorite quotes, if I remember it correctly, I think it's by Heather. Oh gosh, I forgot her name now. She says, every time you eat or drink, you are either causing disease or preventing it. So
Mm,
everything you put in
yeah.
your mouth is either going to help you stay healthy or one day cause you disease, because it
Mm-hmm.
takes a lot for the human body to break down. So
Yes.
that is why it's so important that even if we've not been doing all these things, it's never too late to start. You
Mm-hmm.
know, so lifestyle change is so important in the prevention of dementia. Until
Mm-hmm.
recently, it was like there's no cure for Alzheimer's disease. You cannot prevent it, but now science is saying you can actually prevent different types of dementia. We know that you can prevent vascular dementia for the most part, because high blood pressure, diabetes,
Mm-hmm.
obesity, high cholesterol, these are things that can be managed. And when you
Yes.
manage those things, you can either prevent yourself from having vascular disease and now Alzheimer's, or if you already have it, you can prevent further damage. And that
Mm-hmm.
is why I've written 4 books. My favorite one is the one on vascular dementia,
Mm-hmm.
because it gives me encouragement, it gives me hope that we can
Mm-hmm.
do something to either prevent or mitigate the damage. So
Yeah.
thank you so much, Joanne. That has
You're
been
welcome,
so
Christy.
enlightening. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure that other people have learned, will learn things. So thank you for being here on such short notice as well. I truly appreciate you, and I wish you the very best. What is the name of your company, if you don't mind sharing?
Yeah, so my company is called Remember Me. So
Oh, nice.
yeah, so I named it Remember Me. So I don't mean to like promote my faith, but I'm Christian. I'm a Christian. So before I started this business, I prayed about it, and so it's the me stands for Master's Encounter.
No.
So that's one aspect of it. But I named it Remember Me because whether a person has dementia or whether they are a caregiver, okay, self-care is very important, right? We
Absolutely.
tend to forget the person behind the disease. That's why I named it Remember Me. And also, in our busy lifestyle, especially if you're a caregiver, you also tend to forget yourself,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And that's why I thought, well, maybe just name the business Remember Me, right?
Burnout, like burnout is real. Actually, you know what I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to do? The next time I have you over, I'm going to have you talk about burnout, because it is so real. Like, burnout is one of those things where, again, according to research, older caregivers may even drop dead before the people they are caring for. So
Mm-mm.
it's so important. We'll title that episode Remember Me, okay? So you take me up on that offer. Thank you again, and I wish you the very best.
You're
I
welcome,
appreciate
Christy.
you coming on Masking Dementia Lived Experiences.